Hey everybody, welcome to Class with Kate. It feels weird to be chipper this morning because of the content of what we're going to talk about. But having said that, let's get serious. We're going to get into it. This is real. If you guys listened to the call I did yesterday with Holly, that's what we're going to get into today. I can go over a brief overview of the call. But remember, this is Class with Kate, where I take you to school on all things restoring relationships. Now, as this particularly applies to the call with Holly yesterday, I want to say that restoring relationships is not necessarily restoring the relationship with another person. Restoring relationships can be restoring the relationship with yourself. When we see things, my history and my context is in couples therapy, and so I'm very familiar with a lot of the language around healing relationships when it comes to couples. And a lot of times, for women in particular, when they're struggling with their male partner, people will say, focus on yourself, focus on your own dysfunction. And I think that can be perceived when people don't give more context or information, that can be perceived as like, you're just as dysfunctional as him in the same way. Like you maybe yell and scream, or you lie, or you're deceptive. And that doesn't really land with women in particular, because they're like, I don't do any of that stuff. Like what is focusing on myself going to do in my own issues? Like focusing on my eating disorder, and I'm stereotyping, or I'm generalizing here, but that's like half true to work on, say, your eating disorder. But the other half and the reality of it is to focus on why you're putting up with this dysfunctional behavior. What is it about you that says I have to deal with things like this? And so transitioning to what we're going to talk about with Holly today, all to say is that dealing with your own dysfunction can be breaking down the beliefs that you have related to more codependency type things, as opposed to like you're just as explicitly dysfunctional as your partner or as the person causing you harm in your life. So, having said all that, we're going to get into some very heavy subject matter today. Trigger warning for the call yesterday with Holly and this class today based on the call with Holly. We're going to be talking about sexual abuse. We're going to be talking about very serious topics related to a family system. And so just to warn you, if this is something sensitive to you, that you're allowed to check out, you're allowed to do whatever you need to do in the context of this call, this information. If this is something that you're actively working through and it's going to derail your day, I give you full permission to check out. You know your boundaries, you know what you can take. This is not a situation that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger applies here. That does not apply here, okay? If you have something that comes up, tap out. Not to tell you what to do, but just to empower you to make that decision for yourself. Just because maybe you're interested in this or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy, and you get to decide that. But that's why you give a trigger warning to give people a heads up of the content matter so that they can make healthy decisions for themselves. So, to summarize yesterday's call, if you didn't listen to it, you can listen to it currently on my Facebook page. If you go to my recent live videos, you can see us having this conversation yesterday. I was wearing a pink sweater. If that helps, I often wear pink sweaters. But if you're watching the most recent things, I'm in a pink sweater. This is on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Twitch Live. So you can watch that before you join in here. What I want you guys also to know is that during this class, I want to teach you some things. That's the point of Class with Kate, is to have a caller, have them share their situation and question, and then for me to kind of zoom out, provide context to what came up in that call, And then ask me all the questions you want. Leave comments on my Twitch, on my Facebook, on my YouTube, and I will answer them. Well, not tomorrow because I have a class tomorrow, but in February, this is going to be my new schedule. Call Tuesday, class Wednesday, answer questions Thursday. So leave comments anyway. I mean, I will address them in just my regular social media content. So all to say is that that's how you can access the call. In the short term, in February, again, this will be available on Spotify, Podbean, Apple, all those other podcast platforms. So you can hear just the audio if you want. But, okay, I think that's enough like housekeeping stuff. Let's get into it. So just to summarize the call with Holly yesterday, it was about 30 to 40 minutes. And her situation was that she's in her, I think, probably 30s. She is one of 6 children. She is the oldest of 6. I'm going to actually draw her family tree here. There's the mother and father. Mother, females are circles, men are squares. Just in terms, this is called a genogram. So this is Holly here. She's the oldest daughter, the oldest child of 6 siblings. 1 sister, brother, sister. Okay, so this is Holly here. She's divorced and she has 2 sons. Beautiful sons. She's a great parent. So she called in yesterday to say, her original question was, I'm estranged from my sister. Right here. Sister. That we'll draw maybe a double line here just to point her out. So the sister that's younger than her, but not, obviously in the line, she's number 2. Okay. The reason she's estranged from her sister is because in 2021, her sister's husband, so we're going to draw him here, husband was found to be videoing women naked women. And Holly ended up being one of those women. She told me that the sister they all found this out because the sister, because he got caught, got arrested. The cops told the sister, so his wife, and then the sister, I think, told the parents told Holly that she was one of the women that he videoed. It had happened, I think she had said the year before, so 2020, I guess, when Holly was at their house showering, and there was a camera in the bathroom to record her getting into the shower. Okay? And Holly, just specific to this memory, Holly said she remembered him, so him here, the husband, the perpetrator, being really weird about her going into the shower, whatever. And she was like, you can just shower later, whatever. And she was like, no, I'm just going to shower now. So she got into the shower. She was one of the women that he was secretly recording. In the phone call with Holly, I did not get more information about how many other women there were. But the other important fact here is that one of her, I think one, or I don't know if it was both, of her younger sisters was filmed as well. Okay? So sister's husband, so Holly's brother-in-law, went to jail, or I think went to trial. He eventually took a deal. He pled guilty. I think she said he got 30 days in jail and 3 to 5 years probation, right? And so now he's out on parole. This happened in 2021. Okay? So 30 days in jail and 3 to 5 years probation. Not very well. Sorry, that's kind of is intelligible. Is that the word? Okay, so that's the context here. So Holly calls and she says, I'm estranged from my sister. I think right now they may be no contact. Remember that estrangement is different than no contact. Estrangement can mean a lot of different things. No contact means, no contact. So Holly's calling in, and her question was, I'm curious the difference between me being like codependent and me being healthy and having boundaries. So like, I'm curious what is me being, or like, what's the difference between being codependent with your family and also like loving them with boundaries, which is a great general question, right? And so in the context of this conversation, so that's the upfront information. This is the context, and then that's her question. And that's how all of these calls generally start, is context and a question. And that's where my kind of work begins. So like, let's start exploring here. Let's start adding more context to this. So tell me the situation. Tell me the history of the estrangement. Tell me what's happened. So something that came up in kind of my line of questioning exploration here was, number one, I think if you guys listen to the call, if you watch the call, when Holly says this, so I'm thinking, kind of general stuff about estrangement. I'm not thinking of this. So then Holly drops this bomb that this happened with her brother-in-law, 5 years ago, 4 to 5 years ago, and that Holly was filmed. And I kind of had this reaction of like, wait, what? And the more I got into the call with her, the more I was like, oh my gosh, this is so serious. This is no longer necessarily an estrangement issue. This would not fall into the category of estrangement. This falls into the category of sexual abuse and a sexual predator. Him, right here, the brother-in-law. And so we're going to talk about what sexual abuse actually is. We're going to talk about what sexual coercion actually is. We're going to talk about what sexual harassment is. So there's kind of like levels to this. What we're also going to talk about is trauma and emotional abuse, because the more context that Holly provided here showed that their family system, so the parents and her sister, and then kind of like followed suit, are wanting to keep the family together, so they're not talking about this issue. I think Holly specifically said one of her parents said at some point, we want to keep the family together. So basically like, don't talk about this. And I'm not sure if that was explicitly said or not. But for Holly, she's in a situation where this happened to her. She's got children to protect, but she's kind of like locked down on that. Like, she has boundaries where she will not see him. So that's good, right? Like, that makes sense. The issue though now, and this was her question, was how do I move forward with a relationship with my sister, with a relationship with my parents, with a relationship with my family, my other family, knowing that this has happened not only to me, to other family members, but also to how do I move forward? What do my boundaries look like? How do I have a relationship with my sister when she's trying to not talk about this and gets very upset when I bring it up? And what this actually looks like in real time, like present, current day, is like they'll be in a family group chat, and her sister, they also have a daughter. So her sister and their daughter, like they went on a vacation and sent a picture of their family right here. And there was a picture of him included in what she sent to the family chat, which obviously triggered Holly and crossed her boundary. She's like, I want to hear about you and your daughter. I don't care about your husband. That's a very normal boundary to have. And so she's getting a text in the family chat on a random day with a picture of him where she's triggered, reminded of this trauma. Okay. So let's bridge that into why this is categorized into a trauma. There's a difference between kind of something terrible happening, which would be her getting filmed, and this being a trauma. This is obviously a traumatizing event, but I want to make this very clear. A trauma is something that happens that the body cannot process in real time. That's how kind of general and vague the definition of trauma actually is. This is my understanding of trauma, okay? A lot of people may have different opinions or different views about trauma. Obviously, sexual abuse is a traumatizing event. Holly now has trauma. What trauma is, again, is this event that happened that the body cannot process in real time. So what that means is that, like, of course, him going to jail, him receiving 30 days and getting 3 to 5 years probation is some form of accountability or justice, right? Like, very minimal, not proportionate to the crime in any way, in my opinion. This seems like an injustice actually happened. However, the reason that there's trauma, the reason the whole family has trauma is because they are not talking about it. The energy, the emotion cannot go anywhere. Emotion is energy in motion. It's energy in our body. It's our body's physical response to our environment. It's our body's physical response to things that happen to us. It's very important that energy gets expressed, gets talked about and processed so that it can move through the system and not stay stuck there and cause problems. You hear about people that have autoimmune issues and they get diagnosed in their 40s, right? When we look at their history, there is, I don't have the stats here. There is more likely than not a history of emotional abuse and emotional neglect, okay? So where we're not processing our emotions. And again, because emotions are energy and they're in our body, if they do not get processed, they get stuck. Think of like tangles. And it affects our organs. It affects our blood flow. It affects everything in our body. So that's why healing from trauma is a lot of somatic work. It's a lot of body work because it's stuck emotion. And so Holly has this trauma, not only because this happened to her, but because no one is fucking talking about it. That is the problem. That is the dysfunction of this family system. So this event is illuminating the dysfunction in the family. So that's kind of one part of this. Holly is burdened by this event happening to her and the awareness of her family dysfunction. Okay? So that's why this is categorized as a trauma. Now let's talk about why this is sexual abuse. Let's actually talk about the definition of sexual abuse. I looked this up earlier because I want to get this very right. Unfortunately, I think this the legal definition differs, depending on where you are, which state that you're in. So let's read, let me see here. Okay, legal definition of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is any non-consensual sexual act, often defined by force, threats, coercion, or exploiting someone unable to consent due to age, intoxication, or disability, for example. It encompasses acts from unwanted touching and fondling to rape, including physical force, intimidation, manipulation, and crucially, it occurs when there's no clear, voluntary, and informed agreement from all parties. So the core elements are the absence of consent, that's kind of number one, with a victim's inability to understand the act or communicate unwillingness, treated as non-consent. So consent is kind of the core issue here. This is why education has been pushed so far into consent. Lack of consent. So with Holly in this situation, this falls under the legal definition of sexual abuse legally because she didn't know there was a camera in the bathroom. She did not consent to being filmed in her nude state. Even if she was just changing clothes, she did not give consent in that way. So she was exploited by that. Okay. So that's classic textbook sexual abuse. Now, when it comes to Holly and her healing, she in the call was saying how she was like, it feels weird or if she hasn't named it sexual abuse yet. And that's something for her. She is, and I told her this, she is allowed to name it whatever she wants. When it comes to trauma and her healing, she gets to say whatever it is she needs to say to heal from this process. And that's part of it because he stole her agency from her. He betrayed her sense of safety, not only in that environment, but sometimes it can feel like you are betrayed by your own self. Like, why didn't I know? Why didn't I sense this was happening? You heard her also say, like, why didn't, early on when I first met him, I didn't like him and I didn't listen to that. I listened to everybody else that said, no, there's nothing wrong with him. So that's part of the healing from this abuse and this trauma is listening to yourself and believing yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your gut feeling. You don't need to have a reason. You don't need to even name this as sexual abuse. You don't even need to name him as a sexual predator because you trust that your gut is guiding is right for you. For you. I don't like him, so I don't want to be around him. That's enough. That's enough to never want to be around someone. That's enough to have boundaries around someone, honestly. And we need to teach this to our kids. Like I have a daughter, she's very young right now, and she's more comfortable with other people than she is other people. And not to say, obviously, these people are like what we're talking about, but I'm like, I trust that over anything. She doesn't have to tell me anything, and she never will. I don't like this person. Done. Like that's what it needs to be when it comes to protecting our kids. Okay. But also when it comes to ourselves, you don't have to have a reason. When it comes to trauma, and if you've been victimized, healing from that is believing yourself over anything else, over anybody else, always. Okay? So all to say is that is the trauma, that can be the trauma of sexual abuse, is like, I knew it and I didn't believe it. I knew it. Okay? So lack of consent, force, threats, or coercion. So that's kind of explicit. I think that's when people think of sexual abuse, they think of that. They think of like the monster who's holding a knife to your throat, the monster who's saying like, do this or I'm going to hurt someone you love. Like we're thinking of things like that, like what we would categorize as monsters. And that's why sexual abuse it takes so long for people to recognize it too, because it's not so explicit like that all of the time. It's a lot of times, more often than not, like by far, someone that you know or have a relationship with. This is very important, again, when it comes to protecting your children. So there's that lack of consent or incapacity to consent. So if someone's drunk, blackout, think Brock Turner, that situation. That was sexual abuse. Because the person was passed out. And I think he got something bullshit like 30 days too. It's absolutely insane. So again, there is variations in definitions per state and per federal law. So that's the legal definition, okay? And again, accountability by the justice system is nothing. It can be more harmful to sexual abuse victims because they have to relive it. There's the risk of them not being believed. And there's, again, just the fragility of their emotional sense of self. Okay. So, and then to get 30 days, please, that can be more damaging. So overall, to say that what's very empowering, if someone has been sexually abused, you need to let them run it, okay? You need to let them say what they need. You need to let them kind of let you know what's best for them, and you need to follow it, okay? If your daughter if something has happened to her, you need to say, what do you want to do? What do you need? Like, let's talk about what you need. Here's what I'm concerned with, but let's talk about what you need. And, not to say that this doesn't happen to boys. It happens to more boys than you can even imagine, So I don't know the numbers. I should have gotten them maybe today. I'm not a sexual abuse expert. I just want to educate from what I know about Holly in this call and why it matters, what we can take away. So all to say is the person, Holly needs empowerment. Holly needs to know she can do whatever she needs to do. And that's what matters right now. So that's sexual abuse. Let's talk about sexual coercion. Let's look at the legal definition of sexual coercion, because this is going to go into emotional abuse and what crimes. I don't know. I mean, there's not necessarily legal crimes. I don't mean to accuse her family of that. We're talking about moral, ethical crimes of how her family is handling this situation and how it's affecting her. So, sexual coercion involves using pressure, threats, manipulation, or intimidation to compel someone into unwanted sexual activity, undermining their free will and genuine consent. This can range from persistent badgering to threats of harm or social ruin, often falling under. So this is distinct from rape, which is lack of consent, but sits in a dangerous area where someone might technically consent under duress, making it a serious form of abuse with legal consequences. Okay. What comes up when I hear this, sexual coercion? I think about how often this happens in marriages, okay? Where the man and generally won't help around the house unless his wife is pleasing him sexually. That's sexual coercion, okay? That's weaponizing. That's absolutely abhorrent to me, and it's so common. If your husband decides to not get you gifts for your birthday because you're not sexually pleasing him, that's financial abuse, but that's sexual coercion. Over time, these little things are going to erode your sense of self, your ability to consent enthusiastically about a sexual interaction. Okay. A man that punishes you withdraws affection and love emotionally unless you're giving him his daily BJ. This is normal to people. And it's upheld by belief systems men need to have sex. Men, it's a biological drive. This is what they need, or they get fussy or emotional. It's messed up. That's actually sexual coercion. And that's what we have bought into based on these beliefs we have around men and their needs. This, it's absolutely insane. So coercion is manipulation. It's eroding it's every time he wants to have sex and you're you have to say you have a headache. That's messed up. That's messed up. Not you saying you have to have a headache. You guys need to have a bigger conversation, and depending on the safety you feel in the relationship, that may be something to initiate. But he also has a responsibility to initiate that too. Hey, I notice a lot of times you say you have a headache. Are we talking a health issue here? Or do you not feel safe to talk about how much you want to do this? Let's talk about it. That's a healthy way to deal with it. It's not to just maybe ignore it and pretend it goes away. But that's what marriage is about, talking about it. That requires emotional intimacy. But that's sexual if you were to say I have a headache and he's oh, you never want to do it anymore. He won't talk about it again. He won't initiate a conversation about it again. He won't be curious and compassionate about what's under there. That falls into this category. If he has a negative emotional reaction every time you don't want to have sex with him, that's sexual coercion. And that again crosses the line into emotional abuse and neglect, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Because again, that's what's happening by her parents and then more specifically her sister as well. Well, and so we'll get to the conclusion there. But that's very important to understand. Sexual coercion. That falls under the umbrella of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is an umbrella term. Lack of consent, incapacity to consent, force, threats, coercion, it all falls under the category of like, this is really messed up and traumatizes people and distresses people. And again, this happens more often than not in marriage in particular. And so there's that. Now let's go to more of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment definition. Sexual harassment is any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, including advances, requests for favors, or offensive verbal, physical behavior that creates a hostile environment, affects employment, or is a condition for job benefits. It can happen anywhere, affecting anyone regardless of gender, right? Men and women both, for sure. I mean, think about Hollywood. There's a rising conversation about sexual abuse against young men in Hollywood. I mean, again, this is not about gender. This is about power against someone's vulnerability. Okay. That's what I want you to understand. All right. This is sexual abuse in general is about power against vulnerability. Okay. So emotional, sexual, physical. Okay. That's what we need to remember. So key characteristics of sexual harassment is any unwelcome nature of the behavior and its negative impact. Two things. So it's unwelcome and it's harming someone. Okay. Making someone feel intimidated, humiliated, or unsafe. It includes actions from suggestive comments, inappropriate touching, to explicit sexual demands. This, again, when we're going back to marriage, this reminds me of when women are overwhelmed and they're overworked and they are, again, not getting any of their needs met, especially emotional needs. And men, when she's washing the dishes, comes over and grabs her boobs or spanks her butt. Like, again, trying to be playful, right? Intent is irrelevant in this conversation. Intent is irrelevant. Unwelcome sexual advances and the impact making someone feel unsafe, humiliated, or intimidated. She's probably like, I can't wear these sweatpants anywhere. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, she probably feels unsafe emotionally and sexually in her own home because she tells him to stop and he thinks it's funny. He's like, what? I'm just trying to be playful. We haven't done it in a while. That falls under this umbrella, people. We got to call stuff what it is. We gotta call stuff what it is so that we can know what to do next. Okay. So that's kind of an overview: sexual abuse, sexual coercion, sexual harassment. All right. So there's that. Now let's move to kind of more emotional, psychological, because going back to my definition of trauma, which is a harmful, an upsetting, a traumatic event that the body cannot process in real time. When we're looking at a family system and we remember the terms of abuse being about power against vulnerability and trauma being something you can't process, and this happens, we've got to talk about it. That's the only way we're going to actually heal, get stronger, get better, and become more solid human beings and more solid as a system if we actually talk about this in a healthy way. Now, most people don't have the skills, education to do this. And that doesn't mean that you don't do it. That means that you get help to do it. People specialize in this. This incident is something that if these parents want to take ownership of this for their family, they would be like, we're getting help immediately. We need guidance on how to deal with this. This is sexual abuse. I mean, he went to jail, for God's sake. This didn't happen to one person in the family that he came forward about because he felt guilty and he willingly went to a rehabilitation program. That's not how this went down. He got caught, number one, and that's the only time he came clean about anyone else. I mean, Holly didn't get even into more of the details about how that all came to light, but he didn't come clean on his own. I mean, red flag number 1, okay? Red flag number 2 is that he, she said this on the call. He like complains about his parole. Excuse me? You're complaining about your parole when you should be behind bars. Like, that would be so triggering. That would make so much sense that would fire up her body. Because not only are emotions energy in response to our environment, they're there to protect us. They're there to give us data and information. And so Holly's done such a good job so far listening to her emotions as a way to protect herself. She's done an incredible job. And that's what I told her, like, you need to keep listening to yourself. That's how you're going to heal from this, is like, do anything you need to do based on how you feel. That's really important when it comes to healing. When you've been victimized by not only a man that you already had bad feelings for, but your family who won't talk about it. So all to say is, like, there are some red flags here that this is a very traumatizing situation, and it's bigger than just sexual abuse, because it's activated kind of the parents' beliefs that enable abuse, which is one, we don't talk about it. I saw this documentary with my husband, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago. It was this like alien documentary we found on Amazon Prime. And this aliens, this is the documentary. An alien ship came down, aliens came out, and they were a little school in Africa, like, of children, saw these aliens. Like, some aliens walked out, the children saw it. And, if you believe this or not, whatever. I think the government came out this year, like, confirming that this exists and in our world. So just saying. But for the kids that they saw this kind of crazy event, aliens talking to them or communicating telepathically, literally, that's like what they say. There were some kids that saw it that went back to their religious homes. And because their parents were religious, maybe, I don't know, I want to separate the religion from this abusive behavior, but they're very much enmeshed a lot of the time. The parents are like, no, that didn't happen. That wasn't real. We're not going to talk about it. Those kids were the most traumatized from that event. Whereas the other kids were like, it was just something crazy that had happened. They were believed. They could talk about it whenever they needed to. They were validated, seen. People made it about them. Oh, like, how did that make you feel? What do you need? That's crazy. I wonder what it must have been like to see it. So, like, they were validated. Their sense of self is intact because they were believed. Okay, in a real way, and they could talk about it. That shows also belief, is that, like, yeah, this is real, let's talk about it. And so, but the kids that were traumatized, right? Because trauma is emotions that cannot get processed in real time. These kids cannot process it in the way that they need to. And so they're deeply disturbed because they're like, was that real? Like, can I trust my senses? Can I trust what my body is taking in from my environment? The answer they left that situation with is no, but not because of the situation itself, but how adults, primary caregivers, dealt with it with them. And so even if you're religious, even if you're not religious, what are these beliefs that you have about kids in particular, about emotions, about women, about, sexual abuse and how it happens? What are those beliefs that make you kind of resistant to it? Like, no, that didn't happen. But what were you doing? Well, if you knew, what is that shit that you have in your head that you inherited from somewhere else? What is that? Because if you have those beliefs, you're going to miss something right in front of your face. That's like blasting you in the face. Okay. So going back to the call on Holly is telling me that her parents, again, they don't want to talk about it. They're not getting help to talk about it. And so Holly is feeling like, she said she thinks about it all the time. Of course, rumination being like looping thoughts, like when you can't sleep, when you're laying there and you can't sleep, like that's rumination. It's an overactive thought process. It happens because there's fire on the bottom floor. There's smoke on the top floor coming from the fire on the bottom floor, your heart, your emotions. And we need to feel them. We need to process them. So of course, Holly, having this information and not really having a healthy place to go that would actually be restorative, like her parents, her family. And I think she said she's talked about this with the therapist, but like it only comes so far when you're actively being silenced and suppressed by witnesses to it, by people that know about it. It's only going to keep you there unless you kind of have boundaries and you kind of have to like cut off the cancer, so to speak, and live your own life. Like you can't heal from trauma if you're being continually traumatized. And that's happening because her parents aren't willing to talk about it. And her sister in particular is very resistant to talking about it as well. So to Holly's original question, which was, how do I deal with this estrangement from my sister? What I said to her was like, most likely she's in an abusive relationship. We know that. We don't know if it's sexually abusive, but we know it's emotionally abusive. We know he's probably gaslighting her. So these comments, like complaining about parole on a random day, they might seem understandable. They might seem like innocuous, like, oh, he's allowed to have his feelings. He's on parole. He's allowed to feel this way. And I'm like, he should absolutely never, those words should actually never leave his mouth. Because that shows that he's not getting it. That shows that he cannot check himself. That's a bad sign that there could be some recidivism here, that he might be a repeat offender. There's no remorse. And there's no consequences, no real ones. I mean, parole, like what? You can't have a computer? That doesn't fix what's happening inside, And to fix what's happening inside, there has to be willingness from him. And so if he's saying those kind of comments to his wife, if he's saying them around Holly, how much is he saying those to his wife, where she's kind of bought into this bottom-up approach of like, maybe he has sexual trauma, maybe he has XYZ, and that's why he did it. We need to remember there's two separate parts to these acts, okay? There's the intent, there's the emotional reason, there's attachment disorders, maybe a personality disorder, and there's the entitlement to do it. Two things, okay? That's what I've been talking about recently. Two things are happening here. He's having, emotional, he's having urges. He maybe has his own repressed emotion that's coming out this way. That's kind of a clinical way of looking at it. We need to look at it from an accountability, societal, behavioral standpoint. Like he's doing it because he thinks he can get away with it. He's doing it because he can. He's doing it because he's entitled. Okay. He's not out of control. He's being very premeditated about it. Like there is consciousness there. I think when people say like, oh, he's repressed, like there's all these reasons he's doing it, they're undermining his agency and choice. And that requires a top-down approach, a top-down behavior first. Like if he's making those comments, the wife, like ideally, she's probably terrified of him, again, subconsciously, to say like, never say that around me ever again. And honestly, that really scares me. And that really concerns me that you're in that place. And that's absolutely unacceptable to say. And so all to say is that that's not necessarily going to change him, right? But she has agency over her environment as well. And that's a tricky situation because she's the victim of abuse. Yes. And because she has a child, she does have a responsibility over her environment. She's not the only one getting hurt here anymore. And that's just the truth. That's hard to hear too, because she's a victim. Now let's go to the family, the greater family dynamic. I wonder how often in their childhood, 6 kids, and I think they're not, stair step in age, like a year apart, but I think they're all, I think Holly said the youngest is like 20s, early 20s, and then Holly's the oldest and she's 30s. So, 10 years between 6 kids, that's not 30 years. Like, so all to say is like, I wonder how they grew up, how the parents parented, how the parents responded to the kids having emotional reactions to things, how the parents instilled self-trust, self-belief. Is there a religious element here? I don't know. That further kind of magnifies like the rigidity in parenting, like Christian parenting. There's like a Christian way to parent. All to say is that when people don't know how to do things and they're religious, they're going to subscribe to the way that their religion does it. So no shade, just saying that when there is emotional immaturity paired with religion, that can lead to rigidity, meaning inflexibility. People aren't coming from their own understanding of things. They're coming from another's understanding. And so that can just cause a lot of misattunement, misalignment along the way. And so do these kids all trust themselves? Most likely not. If they were raised authoritarian and a, behavior first approach to parenting, which, I've talked about recently too, which is backwards and inverse with kids, because kids are so emotional, they're so impulsive, they're so in the moment that we need to develop that into, cognition and thought. That's how our body naturally evolved anyway, was emotion, senses, instinct, impulse first. The last thing to develop evolutionarily was our prefrontal cortex, our ability to think and plan and reason. And so because that's the last thing to develop, we need to parent alongside in alignment with their development, not making up for its deficits. Okay? And so that's what a lot of authoritarian parenting is like, think before you act. And it's like, to a 3-year-old, come on. And so they reinforce or punish certain behaviors when a behavior is simply an expression of their developmental stage. So all to say is that, and this is very common parenting, is, and I'm again extrapolating, I'm inferring based on what Holly told me. So all to say is that if the parents are handling this situation in a don't talk about it way, imagine how they handled other conflict that inevitably arises in their kids' upbringing, with school, with friends, in their own, like how do they model conflict resolution in their own marriage? Like it's just a clusterfuck of unresolved conflict and unprocessed emotion. Those two things. Unprocessed emotion, so that hurts the individuals, and then unresolved conflict, which hurts, the group and their relationships. So what can we do now? What did I tell Holly to do to deal with this situation? Well, I told her, obviously get some help for your sexual trauma. This is sexual abuse. We need to name it that way. This is real. You are not crazy. In fact, you're going back to her original question, you're the least codependent one out of everyone, because codependency is enmeshment where, people can't be separate. And calm and differentiated. I told her, because you have boundaries, your desire for connection, your desire for a relationship is actually very healthy and normal. That's not codependency. I don't hear it that way at all. I hear it as like, you have boundaries, you seem differentiated, and you want, you love your family. That's obviously very natural. And you desire to have a relationship with them. Very natural, very normal and healthy that you can hold both things at the same time. And so what I told her to do was to focus on the individual relationships. First of all, I said, you actually don't have to worry about anybody else. You're not responsible for the family healing from this sexual abuse. You of course, and I asked her, like, being the eldest daughter, do you identify with like eldest daughter tropes? She was like, yeah. I was like, of course. And so what that means is that you can feel responsible for everyone almost as if you're a parent. And that's very normal to feel that way when you're the eldest child and when there's unprocessed emotion and unresolved conflict. So very normal. If you watch the call, I erased this whole thing and I was like, you actually, to heal and to really heal and like live a creative, clear life, if what's best for you is just focusing on your family, you actually get to do that. You actually get to do that. And you get to say, Until anybody else wants to be honest and talk about this situation, my contact will be very limited. I've got to protect my mental health. I've got to protect my kids. I'm not responsible for everybody else. I'm not responsible either for everyone else believing me. That's on them. I don't need to say it any clearer. I mean, there's proof. He went to jail and he admitted it, you know? And if no one wants to talk about it more, if no one wants to process it more, that's what I need. And so until that changes, like I've got to keep myself safe mentally and emotionally. So I told her that. I said, you can just focus on yourself. That is an option. Another option is to focus on the individual relationships. And so with her parents, this to me is where this would be the most harmful because of the attachment is like, how do my own parents, how are they not protecting me? And we see this very commonly when there's dysfunction, when there's an abuse in the family system, is a child grows up because they can't trust their emotional experiences, their senses, their intuition. They grow up without these protective instincts, without these self-protective instincts. Okay? That's what happens when parents are behavior first, when they're just moderating, punishing, behaviorally addressing the behavior and not the insides, not the thoughts, not the feelings, not the, what was going on inside of you when you hit your brother? Like, did that build up? Was that in a moment? Like, what happened? Tell me about it. Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, I get that. Do you feel angry? And then you're saying, well, what can we do next? Because we can't hit your brother. What's something else we can do? Here's some options. So that's a bottom-up approach to their behavior. You're developing them alongside their development level. You're not expecting them to be an adult when they're a child. That's ridiculous. You want them to get there on their own with your guidance and support. Okay? But when we don't have that approach with kids, they don't know what's okay to do and they overthink correct behavior. Or like, what's the right behavior? What's the right thing to do? As opposed to, what do I need? And that's what I told Holly to do. Instead of like, okay, what's my boundary here? Intellectual. We need to ask, what do I need? What do I need? What am I feeling? What do I need? And what do I want? I can't get exposed. I need safety. I need protection. I need to be believed. So how does that help me in this group chat? Does people in this group, do I need a separate group chat? It kind of makes solutions. It kind of helps you get creative about solutions that aren't black or white when you're coming from an inside out place. So that was some other advice I gave to Holly was like, let's think about what you need. You actually do as an adult with agency now, because you're not really, you get to have your own life now. Like you get to like unlink yourself now that you guys are all adults. So that's what I told her to do was like have boundaries on what you need, like grieve. Let yourself emotionally experience whatever you need to emotionally experience. And that's going to be tough. Like there can be a loneliness when you take space. There can be, when you're standing up for yourself, when you're getting yourself what you need, there's a natural grief experience that happens. Because one, you should have gotten this the whole time. It's sad as hell that it had to get this extreme for you to learn this. That should never have happened. You should have learned this when you were a kid. And your parents should have taught this. And they should even now be open to change and be open to seeing like, okay, the way I'm handling this is not working for my child. I need to do something differently. Like this is hurting her. And so Holly gets to express that to her parents. So that was the other thing, is to focus on individual relationships, share the impact of this behavior, not just like the parents are doing this and this wrong. It's saying they're doing this and this is how it's affecting me and it's not working for me. And I'm scared and I'm sad and I'm going to have to make decisions I don't want to make otherwise because I have to save myself. Like I'm the love of my life. Like I have to, no one else is looking out for me. I have to look out for myself and I'm going to. That's part of like being an adult with your own family is like protecting your peace in that way. The last thing I kind of shared with her, well, second to last, was like with her younger sisters, was that, if they're 10 years younger, they're in a totally different life phase, that they're going to have to come to terms with what happened to them on their own time. And that might be a long time. The beauty of family is that it's, it's never a period on the end of a sentence. It's kind of like a colon or like TBD. Like I'm closing this book for now, but like there's still the book there. It's not full yet. Maybe, I don't know. That's kind of the hard part about family, is that you can hold out hope. And so until then, it's a grief process. But again, because Holly's not responsible for it, she's just responsible to her sister when they come, and focusing on having a safe relationship there. So that was, another point. The last point, which was her original question of like, what do I do with my sister? And this is the same kind of advice, because it's like your sister's in an abusive relationship. And she also is going to have to figure that out on her own time. You are being actively hurt by your sister's ignorance and dismissal and like kind of further gaslighting and resistance, unfortunately. So like you're not really in a position to like be there for her, which would make total sense. And so that's just something else where we have to grieve and process, but like be empowered to know that that's not our responsibility. As much as we care, as much as we love, as much as we want to have a desire for a relationship, that just may not be the current circumstance, especially as long as the family and these two up here are purporting or enabling or not looking at themselves and the role and what they can do better and getting help for it, because this is a clinical issue. And that's why I'm here online, okay, is to educate people on what you may have the bandwidth for and what you need help for. And that sexual abuse is something to get clinical help for, and to look at yourself and say, okay, what's trauma? How can we heal from this? And to just self-educate. That's just the best antidote to abuse, is education. And power, really. Power is the antidote to it. Power, it's like empowering. It's power is the ability to influence an environment. And then there's agency, which is like you have agency and power over yourself. So we need both of those things in our life to protect us. And that's what this type of parenting style, I'm assuming, strips kids of. And not only the parenting style, but the other influences that add to that. So like these stupid beliefs we have in our culture about men, for example, in marriage. So where else does that come from? So this is environmental stuff. The reason I talk about parents so much is less about parents themselves, because it could be any primary caregiver or influence. But the reason I talk about it is because I want to emphasize environment. Like this isn't a nature-nurture situation like where they're equal. There's so much when it comes to trauma, abuse, and healing that is all about environment. And so all to say is like Holly is so brave for calling in. She is already doing so well. And I want to know what questions you have and what maybe you need further education on. I will tell you kind of when it comes to clinical support, this is less of an estrangement issue. This is not about emotional stuff. This is not about like situational conflict. This is about trauma and sexual abuse in particular. So when looking for a professional, you can go to psychologytoday.com and type in sexual abuse, and therapists that specialize in that or have experience with that would be a better fit, I think, than someone in estrangement. So just to help kind of narrow the search down for you. But as always, like, and this bridges to a need that I have, which is if you have a therapist you like, or if you're a therapist yourself and you agree with this stuff, you specialize in it, and you want to be a resource for callers like Holly or for anyone else that reaches out to me asking for a resource, please reach out to me. I have a form on my website, codependencykate.com. Please fill that out. You guys, if you want updates on callers coming up, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my Twitch, to my Facebook, to my YouTube, to Instagram, TikTok, to all of it at Codependency Kate. That's how you're going to get all this information. And back to this whole bigger picture, like my goal is to help people restore relationships, not only with themselves, but ideally just in their lives in general. And sometimes that comes to relationships with your family in time. Sometimes it doesn't. But ultimately, you have to look out for yourself because you're the only one that wakes up as you. You're the only one that knows what's happening. And we need to stay studious and stay curious about our lives so that we can kind of make up for and gain what we didn't have growing up. So everybody, thanks for watching. I will be back live next Tuesday with our next caller. And then again on Wednesday morning to talk about it. But leave any questions you have and I'll address them. And again, in social media videos, whatever. But thanks for listening and please champion Holly and take care of yourself. See ya.